Before Aegon's death, the last of the Valyrian pyromancers hid his song in the steel.
From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
On June 16, 2022, Variety released that HBO was working on a sequel to their hit fantasy juggernaut, Game of Thrones. The sequel will follow Jon Snow after the events of Season 8 of the series and be the furthest placed story in the entire Westeros timeline. It was then confirmed by author George R.R. Martin on his Nada blog that amongst a variety of prequels, the tentatively titled Snow series was being pioneered by Jon Snow actor Kit Harington. Although the state of the show is currently unknown, the idea of a sequel to Game of Thrones has led me to ponder on the various plots the show might follow. In this series, I will be talking about my ideas for a Jon Snow sequel series centered around themes, plot lines, and returning characters. In today's video, I will be recapping Jon's story in the show and the books. In the end, I hope to provide a pitch for the show that the series creators should follow in order to provide us with a fulfilling story that justifies its existence. To begin with, I think the title Snow is a little boring. With epic titles like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, I believe the show deserves a strong title that can contend with these other shows. For this reason, I am proposing that the show be called The Song of Snow. It fits in with the A Song of Ice and Fire motif while also sounding like it could fit into the book series alongside A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, and A Feast for Crows. My name is Kurt, and welcome to my channel. Please enjoy part 1 of A Song of Snow.
I mean, did you ever wonder why the men of the Night's Watch take no wives and father no children?
No.
So they will not love. Love is the death of duty.
I don't ever want to leave this cave, Jon Snow. Not ever. I should have stayed in that cave.
We'll go back there.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Sometimes duty is the death of love.
Jon Snow is one of the most beloved characters in all of fantasy. Before we begin our speculations onto the Jon Snow sequel series, let us first recount his story in both the books and the television show. As the royal bastard of House Stark and later on the true heir to the Iron Throne, Jon's story is one of identity in crisis. From a young age, Jon fought with the nature of his heritage. Growing up in Winterfell alongside the trueborn children of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn Stark, he was constantly at war with his identity. Jon was a Stark in everything but name, growing up alongside the Stark children but not being allowed to participate with them at social gatherings. With the help of Catelyn, he never forgot his bastard status. Before leaving for the Night's Watch, Ned tells Jon that, "The Starks have manned the wall for thousands of years, and you are a Stark. You may not have my name, but you have my blood." As Jon travels to the Wall, he is again confronted with his identity when he is given the moniker of Lord Snow. Alistair Thorne uses this title to drive a wedge between the Night's Watch and Jon while also reminding him of his bastardy. Lord Snow serves to tarnish the good feelings Jon has toward being a Stark. Jon, however, learns to take this insult and take it for himself. In Jon 3, A Game of Thrones, Tyrion tells Jon, "Would you rather be called the Imp? Let them see that their words can cut you and you'll never be free of the mockery. If they want to give you a name, take it. Make it your own. Then they can't hurt you with it anymore." We see as Jon becomes a leader amongst the new recruits, teaching them the ways of combat and claiming the title of Lord Snow as his new identity. As Season 1 concludes, Jon solidifies his identity by swearing his oaths beneath a weirwood in the haunted forest. In so doing, he sheds all lands and titles, and devotes himself fully to being a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. Next, we see as Jon struggles with his identity in Season 2 of the show when tasked by Qhorin Halfhand to kill him. In the show, we see this exchange between the characters. "One brother inside Mance's army is worth 1,000 fighting against him. They'll never trust me." "They might, if you do what needs to be done." Qhorin goads Jon into killing him so that Jon may prove to the wildlings that he truly wants to defect. This is more plainly played out in Jon 8, A Clash of Kings, where Qhorin says, "Then hear me. If we are taken, you will go over to them as the wildling girl you captured once urged you. They may demand that you cut your cloak to ribbons, that you swear them an oath on your father's grave, and that you curse your brothers and your lord commander. You must not balk, whatever is asked of you. Do as they bid you, but in your heart, remember who and what you are. Ride with them, eat with them, fight with them, for as long as it takes, and watch." To keep his oaths, Jon must betray them. And thus, Season 2 concludes with Jon being brought into the wildling camp to start his new identity as a member of their army. In Season 3 of the show, we see as Jon's identity as a brother of the Night's Watch clashes with his understanding of the wildlings and his love for Ygritte. Throughout the course of the season and A Storm of Swords, we see as Jon begins to sympathize with Mance's cause. Jon is taken with the idea of a new identity as a wildling. This is best shown in his love for Ygritte. Jon is told by Qhorin to do whatever it takes to gain the wildlings' trust, and yet his love for Ygritte is genuine. In the show, we see as this identity solidifies when he makes love with Ygritte for the first time. Jon vowed to father no children, but after seeing Ygritte, he forsakes his oath, accepting her and her love. In the books, we get a little bit more context for this scene. Jon initially sleeps with Ygritte to prove to the wildlings that he has forsaken his oaths. "I know I want you," he heard himself say, all his vows and his honor forgotten. Jon fully accepts Ygritte and lets himself succumb to love, and doing so brings to question his vows. At the end of the season, however, Jon is forced to choose between the Night's Watch and the wildlings. Ultimately, after the sack of Molestown and the brutal murder of the townsfolk, Jon decides to return to Castle Black, refuting his ties to Ygritte and betraying the wildlings. In Season 4 of the show, this conflict resounds within Jon as the wildlings march on the wall. Jon has decided fully his dedication to the Night's Watch, revealing that Mance has an army of over 10,000 men. At the end of the season, the wildlings attack the wall, and Jon is forced to kill the people he once called his friends. The conflict ends with the death of Ygritte by the hands of Ollie. Holding her as she dies, in this moment, Jon realizes the horror that the Night's Watch propagates. This culminates in Jon riding north and seizing Mance Rayder. His rage overtakes him, and he nearly kills the King Beyond the Wall before he is stopped by Stannis Baratheon. It is this event that sets Jon on a path to reconcile his identity as a Night's Watchman and his identity as a wildling. In Season 5 of Game of Thrones, we get the biggest divide between Jon's story in the books and the show. Season 5 paints Jon as the true hero of our story. After being voted to Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jon refuses Stannis' offer to name him Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell. Jon tells Stannis that his duty to the Night's Watch overtakes his desire to be a Stark, although it is something he has always wanted. Throughout the season, Jon tries to lead the Night's Watch to the best of his abilities and eventually finds himself face to face with the White Walkers when he arrives in Hardhome. Feeling a responsibility to the wildlings, and in an attempt to stick to his oaths by guarding the realms of men, Jon convinces the Night's Watch to allow over 60,000 wildlings through the wall to protect them from the incoming White Walker threat. He is then betrayed by the men who swore their oaths to him when he is stabbed to death. In an attempt to bring the Night's Watch and the wildlings together, he turns the watch against himself and ends up killed. In A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons, however, the story is a bit more complicated. Jon denies Stannis as he does in the show, claiming the Night's Watch as his true identity. However, when Jon is stabbed in the books, the story is very different. After receiving a letter from Ramsay Bolton detailing the death of Stannis, Mance, and the She-Wolves, as well as the capture of both Arya and Theon, Jon snaps. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Jon has been through so much over the last 4 books, and the idea of yet again having to ignore his identity as a Stark, as he did when he decided to stay with the Watch after Robb declared war on the Crown, ruins him. In a last-ditch effort, Jon decides to break his vows and involve the Night's Watch in the politics of the Seven Kingdoms by sending troops on Winterfell. Up until this point, the men of the Night's Watch were fully loyal to Jon. Unlike the show, the book paints Jon as the villain from the point of the Night's Watchman. He has forsaken his oaths again. How can he lead? As Jon's story comes to a conclusion in Book 5, we see what the horrors of the Night's Watch have done to this boy of only 16. This will become an important point of discussion later in our series when I discuss the possible plot lines for The Song of Snow. In Season 6 of the show, we see as Jon lays dead at Castle Black. Alistair Thorne, one of Jon's mutineers, has taken command of the Watch. After the death of Stannis Baratheon at the hands of Brienne of Tarth at the end of Season 5, Melisandre is having a crisis of faith. She believed that Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn, the prince who was promised. Upon his death, however, she feels misled by her god. As Melisandre's faith slowly dies, she attempts a final resurrection of Jon at the end of Episode 2. Jon opens his eyes and, in being resurrected, is free of his oaths sworn to the Night's Watch. Now, resurrected, he executes the mutineers and renounces his command of the Watch to Ed Tollett. Jon has fully rejected his identity as a Night's Watchman and decides to move with the wildlings against Ramsay Bolton on Winterfell. In the show, we see how Jon, having denied his Stark heritage in the past, has led him to this moment. Although he fails in taking Winterfell, leading many men to their deaths and only being saved at the last moment by the Knights of the Vale, the Battle of the Bastards represents Jon fighting for his identity and his family. It is this victory over the Boltons that cements Jon as the King of the North. Jon has never been closer to his Stark heritage, and has finally been accepted by the people of the North, with everyone releasing him of his bastardy. Taking over the title of his dead brother, Jon accepts his new role and rule over the North and declares justice for all they have faced at the hands of the Crown and the Lannisters. Season 7 of the series sees Jon's identity as King of the North quickly shattered. Jon's new role requires him to put to rest the betrayal of various Northmen by accepting the fealty of House Umber and Karstark. It is his goal to do right by his people, something he has always tried to do. To protect the North from the incoming White Walker threat, Jon travels to Dragonstone to meet with Daenerys to receive dragonglass from her stores. Daenerys demands Jon bend the knee, but he refuses. He and Daenerys butt heads until Jon realizes that she may be the key to defeating the White Walkers. This season shows Jon's desperate scramble to convince the rest of the world of the White Walker threat. With the help of his friends, Jon journeys north beyond the Wall to capture a White to prove to Queen Cersei that the threat is real. Daenerys sacrifices one of her dragons to save Jon and his companions. At this moment, Jon realizes that Daenerys has put the people above herself and her dragons, who she believes to be her children. She is willing to sacrifice anything to protect the people of Westeros. At Jon's heart, he knows that above anything, his duty is to guard the realms of men, and thus he bends the knee to Daenerys. In this instance, Jon relinquishes his identity as the king in the North in order to protect his values regarding the small folk. At the same time, Jon begins to fall in love with Daenerys as he sees her love for the small folk paired with her strength and independence. It is this love that will ultimately lead to Jon's final downfall. Season 7 concludes with the North beginning to amass defenses against the imposing White Walker threat as the resurrected Viserion destroys the Wall with icy flame. Season 8 of the series opens with the armies of the North preparing to fight the White Walkers. At this point, Jon has sacrificed his titles to Daenerys to ensure the survival of Westeros. At the same time, he has fallen madly in love with her. Jon has finally reached the point where he can reconcile all of the disparate aspects of himself. He can be a leader of men, but he does not need to be the leader. He can love fully, and finally has found a love that is not something to be ashamed of. He is content to support and defend the North under Daenerys. However, Jon learns of his true parentage through Sam at the end of episode 1. This revelation again shatters Jon's understanding of himself. Not only is he not a bastard, but he is also the true heir to the Iron Throne. He is not Jon Snow or Jon Stark, but Aegon Targaryen and the nephew to Daenerys. His love with her is now tainted as they are practicing incest. Jon decides for himself that he can no longer love Daenerys romantically, but he can love her as his queen. Jon denies his new role and identity as Aegon Targaryen, repeating the infamous line, "I don't want it," over and over, giving his birthright up to Daenerys. During the Battle of Winterfell, Jon's story comes to a climax. For 7 seasons, he has sparred with the White Walkers. He has faced them time and time again, but, in the end, he has refused a final confrontation with the Night King. As Jon stands there in the snow, the Night King heading towards Winterfell, Jon is faced with the reality that he is not the hero of the story. After all his hard work, he is not allowed his final victory that is finally taken by Arya. In the end, this does not matter, and Jon is lauded for the victory over the dead. Jon's identity as a Northman and being beloved by wildling and watchmen alike drives a wedge further between him and Daenerys. In the second half of Season 8, Jon leads the charge on King's Landing for Daenerys. He does not want to fight the soldiers, but still believes that Daenerys on the throne will be for the benefit of the realm. As Daenerys topples the Red Keep, securing her victory, Jon tells his men to stand down, for King's Landing is surrendering. As the bells toll, the Northern Army begins its attack on the people of King's Landing, and Daenerys succumbs to madness, destroying civilian and building alike. For the last time, Jon's understanding of the world is shattered. Whatever he thinks, whatever he thought he knew, Jon truly knows nothing. The next hours and days are a daze for Jon. He walks through the decimated city like a corpse. Tyrion and Jon have a very confusing conversation about morality, duty, and Daenerys. They both believed in her as their queen, and they both loved her. In the end, Tyrion and Jon decide that what they thought was wrong and she must die. Jon, yet again, is tasked with betraying the woman he loves for the sake of his people. As Jon slides the knife between Daenerys' ribs and Drogon destroys the Iron Throne, Jon is left a man without identity. If love is the death of duty, and duty is the death of love, what does that make him? He is an Oathbreaker, a Kinslayer, and a Targaryen. But he is also a Stark, and a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, and a Northman. In his final act of the story, he does something to guard the realms of men. But after all this, what can he truly call himself? At this point, as Game of Thrones comes to an end, Jon passes through the Black Gate surrounded by wildlings. He leaves Castle Black and betrays the sentencing put upon him by the Crown and the Unsullied, and disappears into the Haunted Forest. For the sake of brevity, I have left a lot of detail out of this summary, but for the purposes of this video, it gets us refreshed on Jon's story. In the end, Jon is left with many questions. He saved the world twice, but at what cost? Who is he? What does he believe? And how can he continue to live? Love has betrayed him, duty has betrayed him, and lastly, blood has betrayed him. As we can see, Jon's story is far from complete, but if HBO is to continue it, Jon's identity must be at the very center of the show. In addition, a sequel series will have a lot of broken pieces to contend with. Like many of the characters, Jon's story lost its way. From too easily bending the knee to Daenerys, to ignoring Jon's resurrection and the revelation that Jon is the heir to the Iron Throne, there are many plot points that need to be reconciled in a sequel series. One of the aspects I think was poorly executed but I think is a good idea is this concept that Jon is not in fact the hero. In the books, Jon is supposed to fulfill this archetype. He is a good character from the start of the series, but we see as the evils of the world push him to do more and more grisly deeds. In George R.R. Martin fashion, I think we can expect Jon to go down some darker paths after his resurrection, which will work to subvert our expectations surrounding Jon's heroism. The Azor Ahai and Prince Who Was Promised prophecies are seemingly red herrings and will either be fulfilled in unexpected ways or will not be fulfilled at all, like we see in the show. However, George will hopefully seed enough doubt in our minds so that when the prophecy is dealt with head-on, we are surprised but do not feel cheated. Dan and Dave tried to subvert our expectation by denying us Jon's final fight with the Night King, but with no setup, the scene fell flat. They set Jon up as the classic fantasy hero. His death and resurrection are somewhat Christ-like, and in the end, the audience expects him to save the world. In addition, with House of the Dragon Season 1 shoehorning in the prophecy of the Prince Who Was Promised, it is evident that HBO wants to tie every show in Westeros into the main conflict of Game of Thrones. Although the prophecy could relate to Arya, I think HBO has bigger plans for this plotline which could be addressed in the Song of Snow. Lastly, there is one plot point I did like. Jon's execution of Daenerys fits well into Jon's story. Jon's story focuses heavily on his obligation to do things he does not want to do. Jon does not want to join the Wildlings. He does not want to be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He does not want to be the heir to the Iron Throne, and he does not want to kill Daenerys. I feel as though this scene works to bring together many of the conflicts Jon has faced throughout the show. And, in the end, Game of Thrones left us with a Jon who is very broken and in a confusing place. However, it leaves us the exciting task of trying to put the pieces back together and create a narrative that gives us a more satisfying ending for the character and also the show. A Snow sequel series will have a lot to address, but through the eyes of Jon Snow, I think this could be a captivating story. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of The Song of Snow. In part 2, we will be discussing the tenets that the writers, showrunners, and actors should follow to make this the best story possible. We are going to dip into the mind of George R.R. Martin and outline the themes of A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as many of his other works, so that The Song of Snow feels like it belongs in the Westerosi canon. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. I've been Kurt, and Valar Morghulis. A little post-credit scene here. If you made it this far, thank you. I just wanted to say that this is my first ever video of this type and I would love to know what you thought of it. After watching it over, I can see that I have pretty heavily ripped off a number of A Song of Ice and Fire creators in my formatting. In the coming weeks, I hope to develop my own style, but I would like to thank the community for inspiring me to make this and share my ideas. All of the artwork shown I made using Midjourney AI tools and will be available for free download in the description. Feel free to use any of the images in any way you like and no need to credit me. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.